Okay, welcome back from. Hope everyone had a nice polling. Hey, Amud Aleph. Bava Metzia daf Pei Amud Aleph. So we're in the middle of a series of dapim in Bava Metzia from Pei Gimel to Pei Zayin that have a lot of agadata. And this week we're going to start talking about a particular idea, but then the real chap of the shiur is talking specifically about a chain of rabbanim, of a grandfather, a father, and a son. Named the grandfather is Rabbi Bisa, and the son was Rabbi Chama, and then the grandson was Rabbi Oshaya. And we're going to learn a couple of stories about them and ask some questions about things that don't quite make a whole lot of sense. And then at the end, I'll try to offer what I couldn't find anyone who suggested this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's my chiddush. But I assume someone has said it. But to me, it's so clear that this is what it means that it has to be almost pshat. But there's a hidden layer of a particular series of halachot that we'll learn in Bava Batra that has to do with the lives of these rabbanim, and at the end we'll try to tie all the sources that we're going to learn together. And with that, let's begin. So the Gemara in Bava Metzia daf Pei Amud Aleph says as follows: Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Amri la Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amri la Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonatan. כל המלמד את בן חברו תורה, זוכה ויושב בישיבה של מעלה. שנאמר אם תשוב ואשיבך, לפני תעמוד. So anyone who teaches the child of his friend Torah, he gets to learn or sit in the yeshiva של מעלה. וכל המלמד את בן עם הארץ תורה, אפילו הקדוש ברוך הוא גוזר גזירה מבטלה בשבילו. שנאמר אם תוציא יקר מזולל, כפי תהיה. And if you teach the son of your Amorotza friend Torah, so then, even if Hashem had decreed a decree against you, He tears up the decree. That's how important it is to teach Torah, and all the more so to if your friend is an Am Haaretz, because he can't teach his son himself. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, ve'amila Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ve'amila Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Kol hamelamed et ben chavero Torah. Okay, excuse me, I brought this twice by accident. No, I just copied and pasted it twice. I'm sorry. So Amar Rabbi Parnach. Yeah, okay, on the end of the third line. Amar Rabbi Parnach, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Kol shu talmid chacham, uvno talmid chacham, uven beno talmid chacham, shuv en Torah poseket mizra'o le'olam. שנאמר, ואני זאת בריתי, אמר השם, לא ימושו מפיך, ומפי זרעך, ומפי זרע זרעך, אמר השם את עבר עולם. So if you have 3 generations, you have a man and his son's son are all Torah scholars, so guaranteed that Torah will not leave their family line forever. As the Pasuk says, lo yamut. A chazaka, exactly.
It's like 3 generations.
Bidyuk, it's a chazaka.
3 times.
That's right, absolutely. It's a chazaka, right. And how do we know this? V'ani zot briti, and Hashem makes a brit that if lo yamush mipicha mipi zaracha mipi zera zaracha, that's 3 generations. Amar Hashem et avalam. As if you have Torah that doesn't leave your mouth for 3 generations, Hashem says it will then be forever. It will be like that. Okay, so that's the guarantee. Maya Amar Hashem, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, ani arev lecha b'davar hazeh. I'm a guarantor to this. That if you have 3 generations of Talmidei Chachamim, that you put my name on the contract, as it were, that you're going to have you're going to have Torah for forever in that line. Uma ve'ata ve'olam, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, מכאן ואילך, Torah מחזרת על אכסניא שלה. That it means from this point on, once you have the grandson, from that point on, Torah comes מחזרת על אכסניא שלה, means comes back to her lodging. When it comes back to the inn, comes back home. The Torah is always going to kind of make her way back to this family. This is where she belongs. And she's going to, like Lassie runs away from her, she's always going to make her way back.
Is that a different limud than the original Me'atava Adelam? Because, like, why are we asking my Me'atava?
Good question. What do you think?
I don't know.
Okay, we'll see we'll look at some of the Achronim and they'll ask that question. It's a good question.
Maybe the Lashon Me'atava Adelam and not La'alam.
Yeah, it's the Achronim or Medayak in that. We'll see it shortly, and if we don't answer it explicitly, remind me, and I'll address it. Okay, so very good. Hey, this seems like a pretty straightforward Gemara about learning Torah and having it kind of carry through the generations. Very nice. I want to take our attention now to a completely, on the surface, unrelated Gemara. Okay, it's a Gemara in Bava Batra and Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph, actually. And the context there in Bava Batra is talking about all sorts of different halachot about property rights and people doing things in other people's property and needing permission, being allowed to do this and that, and things about disputes with neighbors. And it says as follows, and let's pay attention to this very carefully because it's going to become relevant later on. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, צינור המקלח מים לחצר חברו, ובא בעל הגג לסותמו, בעל החצר מעכב עליו. So what does that mean? I have a pipe. Okay. I have a pipe that carries water from my roof into the. Can you go into the room for a second? Okay. I have a pipe that goes from my roof into my neighbor's property. Okay, so it's my roof. Rains, whatever. There's a pipe that takes. Sorry.
Gutter.
A gutter. Yeah. There's a gutter that takes water from my roof, and it spills it out into the neighbor's property. And now I, the owner of the house, I want to close up the pipe, or I want to divert the water into my property. So the question is the neighbor allowed to protest that? Right? Why would the neighbor want to protest that? So it says here, the Amar le, ki hechi da'at kanya lecha chatzer didi lemishdach beich maya, the didinami kanili maya digrach. So the neighbor can say, until now when you decided to divert the water, to stop it from flowing into my yard, you benefited from having a place to dump all your water, namely into my yard. But I also benefited from getting that water to water my plants or whatever I wanted it for. So I have a right now to come and stop you from preventing that benefit from continuing. So I'm allowed to say to you, don't continue, don't divert or don't stop up the even though it's your pipe, even though the water comes from your property, I've benefited from it. And since you kind of did that and we were shutaf in this, I have a say and I'm allowed to prevent you from stopping from closing up the pipe. Okay? So that's Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and that's the halacha. Itmar, it was taught, Rabbi Yoshaya Amar Me'akev. Okay, so Rabbi Yoshaya said the same as Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Me'akev meaning that the neighbor who has the chatzer is allowed to say, I don't want you to divert the water, I want it to continue flowing into my courtyard. He's allowed to protest. Okay? Rabbi Chama Amar Eino Me'akev. Rabbi Chama says the neighbor's not allowed to do that. Right? Why is the neighbor not allowed to do that? Because it's my pipe, it's my water, it's my roof. I'm allowed to do with it as I please. So leave me alone. Azal Shaile Rabbi Bisa. So they went and they asked Rabbi Bisa this question. Amaru Ma'akev, and he said the neighbor is allowed to protest, which is according to who? Who does he agree with? Rabbi Yoshaya. And who does he disagree with? Rabbi Chama. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Kari ale Rami bar Chama. So this other rabbi applies to this situation. Right, the three-threaded cord will not tear easily. This is a famous pasuk. What does it have to do with this?
Weddings, like about couples, no?
Meaning?
It's like a chut mishulash. It's like the couple and Hashem.
Couple and Hashem. Right, it's a union that does not break. Right, exactly. You say it about couples. It's applied in Shas in all sorts of situations. Torah, Mishnah, Nagada, and things like that. This comes up all the time. And so Rami bar Chama is applying it here. How does it apply here? Zeh Rabbi Yoshaya, beno shel Rabbi Chama, beno shel Rabbi Bisa. Okay, so I kind of gave a spoiler in the beginning when I introduced, but these Rabbanim are all related to each other. They're father, son, grandfather, son, grandson pair. So what does this mean? Right, what happens? You have a machloket between who? You have a machloket between a father and a son, Rabbi Yoshaya and Rabbi Chama. They argue, right? Rabbi Yoshaya says that the can you sit quiet, please? Thank you. Rabbi Yoshaya says that you are allowed to, the neighbor's allowed to protest and say, don't divert the water. And his father says the neighbor's not allowed to protest and says, you can divert the water. And who did they go ask? They said, this is a machloket between Abba and Beno. Let's go ask the Saba. He'll help us understand what to do. And the Saba, who does he paskin like? The grandson. Like the Neched, not Lokeh Beno. Very strange, right? Very strange. So good. I mean, it seems like a pretty cut and dry, very normal halachic debate about something very specific, but the circumstances of applying this pasuk and the characters involved is not a normal machloket. It seems that there's something a bit unusual in that regard. Okay. So Tosfot wonders, and this is a question that also we would ask. When it says here, Chuta Mishulash, Lo B'Nai Natek, why is that difficult to apply here? No, it says Rami bar Chama applies that on this family. Why is that weird?
There's a disagreement.
There's a disagreement.
In the middle.
They're arguing with each other, right? The whole point is there's a machloket within the family. The grand says one thing, the father disagrees, and the grandfather goes and disagrees, the father agrees with the grandson. You're learning from that, I would say the exact opposite. I would say this is an example of families arguing with each other.
Is this thing about them or about the case? Like there's a status quo, we don't change the status quo.
What do you mean?
The status quo is the water goes into the neighbor's yard.
Right.
You can't just change it. You need to get consensus from the other side.
There's no connection to that.
That's Rabbi Chana's opinion.
No, but the Chut Mishulash may be talking about the case and not necessarily...
No, but it says,
no. It's talking about the three chords are the three rabbis.
I'm not sure
I think that it connects to...
negative on the family. Like, we know Abba and Rava argue the whole time they're supposed to be good friends. Like,
Right.
I think it might be talking about the fact that they're all like arguing in Torah. Like,
Also, could
it's
mean
a
that the
three-generation-
grandfather and the grandson are on the
so even though the father's trade, he comes back to the
right.
grandson.
It's a chotam shalosh, like 3 generations. It all comes back together.
Okay, good.
So it's like,
Both good points. Yeah.
it's also like דברי אלו ואלו אלוקים חיים. It's like exactly about מחלוקות של בית הלל ובית שמאי.
זה מחלוקת לשם שמיים, זה לא...
זה
זה
same-
שהם לא מסכימים, זה לא אומר שזה משהו רע.
It's the same idea. It's
זה
like...
משהו טוב, יש פה תורה, יש מה לדבר, כל אחד ידע...
Okay. Yossi.
The
Okay.
biggest difference, I think most people will be happy, even if they have different opinions in them. If their kids were arguing them in Torah, doing okay.
I would say the Metzias doesn't necessarily agree with that, but okay. Parents don't like when you... I don't know. Most parents say you agree with me. I don't
Shy.
say that. But good. You're redeeming my initial question. So ask another question then, okay? You've convinced me. Where's Rabbi Bisa in this? Excuse me. Rabbi Bisa is there. No, that's a question for later. Never mind. I'll get to it.
Remember the
Okay. Good. So good. Okay, so you say Chutam Mishulash does apply. Machloket L'Shem Shamayim is not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe like David Moshe, that you have the tail ends, it ties it all together. Beseder. Okay. Let's see what Tosfot says. Tosfot says, so Tosfot asks a bit of a different question. He says as follows: Kama hayu shehen ve'avotehen ve'avot avotehen hayu talmidei chachamim ve'lo kama aleim Chutam Mishulash. What's his question?
דווקא פה, מה?
למה דווקא פה? How many sets of 3 generations of Torah scholars have existed?
I already know.
You don't say
Hillel Zakai know his kids. Like, everybody were in the same.
Right, they were all there. So you said to me, machloket l'shem shamayim, זה לא משהו רע, זה משהו טוב. Great, so apply it to every time when there's a machloket between generations, but they're all, ala derech. They're all chutam mishulash. Why specifically this family? Right, that's Tosfot's question. We don't find this applied elsewhere. So he says as follows: Ela hachahainu taima lefi sheshloshtan ra'u zeh et zeh. So it's not just that they were all Torah scholars; it's that they overlapped in their Torah. They saw each other and they overlapped in their discussion. Okay. Right, when it quotes Itmar, it says Rabbi Yoshaya, and then Rabbi Cham, and then they go ask Rabbi Bisa. Lichora, I would have thought, first ask the
Rabbi Bisa.
Ask the Saba, or if not him, at least ask the father and then the son. Why do you start with Rabbi
When you're
Yoshaya?
bringing the machlokes, you start with the father.
You start with the father and the son, then go ask the grandfather, at least, right? So, Lefi Shaya Gadol Yoter Midai. Rabbi Yoshaya was greater than Rabbi Chama, so you bring his opinion first. That's what Tosfot says. How do we know Rabbi Yoshaya was the greatest of the 3? Kedalmer, it says Neuvin, לבן של ראשונים, כפתח אחד, רבי יושע, ואמרנם רבי יושע בדורו, כרבי מאיר בדורו, שלחו חבריו לעמוד על סוף דעתו. Rabbi Yoshaya was another level. So you bring him first, even though he was the son or the grandson, he was the greatest of the 3. So he is brought first, his opinion is brought first. That's what Tosfot says. Okay, so that's what Tosfot explains it. So as an aside, I want to do a quick aside on this, and we'll go to the next Gemara. The grandson of Rav Chaim Volozhin asked him on this idea of a chutam mishulash lo b'marayin atek, and what we said earlier, which is if you have 3 generations, that guarantees Torah is never going to leave you. So the grandson of Rav Chaim Volozhin said to him, "What about Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov? They were all tzaddikim. They were all lomdei Torah. So doesn't that mean all Jews should have Torah? Because everybody's descended from Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Hashem promised, Amar Hashem etav ad olam. So what are you applying it to this family, that family? What's the chiddush?" So it could be that, and we'll see other answers in a minute, how Rav Chaim Belazhin answered actually, but one potential solution is to say, what Tosfot says here is that this only applies k'shera'u zeh zeh, right, when their lives overlapped and they taught Torah to each other, or they learned Torah with one another. Okay, good. So did Avram and Yaakov, Yitzchak and Yaakov overlap? So who remembers? Yeah.
Avraham died
כן.
when Yosef.
Oh, one second. The grandfather has to teach.
Avraham passed away when everything happened with Esav. That's why he meant the Adashim.
No, that's what it is.
בדיוק. So Rashi brings the midrash that says that when Yaakov was making the Nezidat Hashem, that was for the Shiva of Avram Avinu.
One second. The grandfather and the grandson have to be overlapped.
Yeah.
All three of them.
All three of them have to overlap. So if you add up the years, Avram was 100 when he gave birth to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak was 60 when he gave birth to Yaakov, and he died when he was 175. So that means Yaakov was 15 and Avram died. So it makes sense. He was making a soup. He was 15. He was a teenager.
And he didn't teach him Torah.
That's usually what you do when you're 15. Make
So right. The question is, so we can't. Let's say we can argue that Avram and Yaakov didn't really sit and learn in the Beis Medrash and have a machloket about a pipe from one garden into another together, because he was only 15 when he passed away. So you could suggest that. Rav Chaim Belazhin gives a different answer, but I wanted to suggest that as well as a way to kind of deflect the question. Okay, if we take Tosfot's qualification that this has to be where everybody is alive and overlapping, and that they're arguing for the sake of Torah. So you could say that, of course, Avram and Yitzchak had that, Yitzchak and Yaakov had that, but you didn't have the Chut HaMishulash necessarily.
You still have Yitzchak, Yaakov, and any of the Shvatim now.
All right,
It's
again,
like Yaakov and Yosef. Even though I don't know if Yosef...
what with the Eglah Rufa, you mean?
No, it's Ephraim and
כי יצחק ידע שעושה
You have Yaakov, Yosef,
Yeah, but not all.
No, but they actually had a chavrusa together? I don't know.
Like all descendants will be Talmidei
Okay,
Chacham?
good. We're getting to it. Good. So Joe's asking another question.
Or a line will keep
We want
going.
to be clear on a guarantee here.
So good, Joe. Let's skip to we'll come back. So based on what you just said, let's go to the Midrash Shocher Tov. Okay, it brings the same midrash, but it adds another twist. Okay, Davar Acher. This is the midrash on Mizmor Nun Tet in Tehillim. Tovim Hashnayim min ha'echad. This is a pasuk from Kohelet. 2 is better than 1. What does it mean? 2 is better than 1.
I know.
Tov tzadik ben tzadik, mitzadik ben rasha. It's better to have a tzadik, the child of a tzadik, than a tzadik, the child of a rasha. Why? Because if you have 2 generations of tzidkut, that merit is greater than just 1 generation. They have more reward. If a disaster is meant to befall a family, and you have a father and a son who have righteousness, then that can nullify a decree that only 1 generation is not able to nullify. Whatever that means. Right? It's a pasuk from Yirmiyahu that says, if there's a city, I need 1 tzaddik, and if there's a family, I need 2 tzaddikim. שבשביל 2 ממשפחה, אותה משפחה מצלחת. ואם היו 3 צדיקים, what if I have 3 generations of צדיקים? צדיק בן צדיק בן צדיק, אין הפוסקת מהם לעולם. It's going to continue forever, שנאמר, החוט המשולש. So the source it brings here is not what we brought in Bava Metzia, of לא ימוש מפיך ומפיך, but rather what we saw in Bava Batra applied to Rabbi Chama and his family. Okay? Amru lifnei Rabbi Zera. And the Amru here is Joe. Okay? Joe asks Rabbi Zera, Valo ploni tzadik ben tzadik, v'dorevi reshaim. So he says, what are you talking about? I look around all the time at the world, and I see that you have a grandfather who had a righteous son, who had a righteous grandson, and then the great-grandson is Shlob. So you're telling me that it's guaranteed now that forever they're going to be Talmidei Chachamim. So Malahem lo b'merayinatek. That's the end of the pasuk, right? That the three-threaded cord will not quickly break. So what does that mean? Shafilu poseket chozeret. So even if it unravels for a little bit, it gets rewound. In other words, you can have breaks in the thread, or little generations where things, but it'll come back eventually. So you could have that. There's going to be someone who goes off the derech, but in the end, that family tree, in general, is going to be one where there is Talmidei Chachamim. That's a way to avoid the question of wait, halo ploni tzadik ben tzadik ben tzadik. What?
Avoid any kind of question.
Yeah, it basically makes it. So what we're seeing is that this original statement of Bava Metzia, we're just qualifying it and qualifying it and qualifying it. We're going to see we're going to do it even more, to the point where we started by saying you have 3 generations of Talmidei Chachamim. Everybody's going to be a tzaddik forever. And then we said, but that has to be only if their lives overlapped and only if they actually learned Torah together, Machloket L'Shem Shemayim. oh, and also, if it doesn't actually happen, it's okay because eventually it'll come back and happen. So you're taking away all of the oomph out of the original statement, okay? And we're going to see the Achronim deal with this in a minute. Okay, okay, now here Rabbi Zera is the one who brings this
similar
pasuk.
thing back to
Okay, כיוון שהוא בן תורה ובנו בן בנו שוב בן תורה פוסק מהן שנאמר מיטב העולם מה הוא אמר השם אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא אני ערב בדבר הזה. Okay, so that was just to kind of point out what Joe was saying. You know, actually, even before we go to the Gemara Ketubot, I'll just finish the Achronim here, and then we'll go to the point about the Rabbanim. So like we just said, we're limiting and qualifying this to a point where it almost doesn't have any meaning. And there's actually Mishnah in Pirkei Avot where it says, "Hatken atzmecha lilmod Torah she'ena yerusha lach." It's a statement by Rabbi Yossi in Pirkei Avot. It says, "Prepare yourself to learn Torah because it's not inheritance to you." And the problem with that is didn't we just learn here that what if I happen to be the fourth generation, then I'm guaranteed that Torah is an inheritance for me. So what are you telling me that it's not an inheritance for me? So the Ikar Tosfot Yom Tov in his commentary on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, he says, "Shekach dorshu abotenu bepasuk lo yemush mipicha mipizarcha mipizarcha v'kamashma Rabbi Yossi dahani milek shemetaken atzmo lechach v'mitkayim bo yoter mizulato v'imlav hachilo." So he says, how do I understand this? He says, right, if the fourth generation has no interest in learning Torah,
it's not going to happen.
so it's not like, oh, because the previous three generations, Hashem is arev b'davar hazeh me'atav et olam, so he's going to be a Torah scholar even if he has no interest. That doesn't make any sense. Rather, it must mean that it's just easier for him if he, like his ancestors, chooses to pursue that path because he has that promise of the previous generations. It'll be easier for him to learn it than others who don't have the previous generations and don't have zchut avot. That's how the Ikar Tosfot Yom Tov understands a way to resolve the contradiction. Okay, if you look at the Eitz Yosef, where he says "Lezeh shuv ein Torah poseket mizaro le'olam," on the right side on the bottom. התורה מחזרת על אכסניא שלה. הנה רבי יוסי אמר, in פרקי אבות, והכן עצמך ללמוד תורה שאינה ירושה לך. ואמר הגאון מוולוז'ין, זה רב חיים וולוז'ין, אני רוצה לומר שאף שאתה דור רביעי מתלמיד חכם שהבטיח הכתוב על זה שהתורה מחזרת על אכסניא שלה, the pasuk promises the fourth generation will also be a Torah scholar. כמו שפירשו חז"ל בפסוק וימוש מפיך וגומר את העולם. ואם כן תאמר שהיא תבוא אחריך ואינך צריך להתקין עצמך לכך. That implies you don't have to work at it. It's a guarantee, it's a promise. So what are you telling me now? You have to learn Torah, it's not inheritance. So he says, כי זה טעות. It's a mistake to think that you get it for free. כי בוודאי תורה מחזרת על אכסניא שלה. It's true that Torah will always come back. But what does it mean to come back? אבל כיוון שאתה מבריח עצמך ממנה, but if you proactively run away from it, and you reject it, and you refuse to learn it, so eina me'achsanya shelcha. Right? It's not the Torah's lodging. You're not the lodging of the Torah if you refuse to let her in. V'lo tuchal ladu imcha be'achsanya under achat. Right? This town ain't big enough for the two of you. Rak ata al kol panim tzarich להתקין עצמך לכך להתקרב אליה. Great. So then again we go back to the original question. So then what is the whole chidush of saying I have three generations? If you tell me, it means you have to really learn and work at Torah. So then you're not gaining anything from the three generations. So he says, he says, similar to Kosov Yom Tov, it must mean that it's easier for you because you have the tzchut avot, but you still have to work at it. Okay, so that's how the Achronim kind of deal with that. That also answers the question you asked before of what's the chiddush of Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, מכאן ואילך תורה מחזרת על אכסניא שלה, that it could take a break and come back. In other words, she always comes back home, which isn't clear from the pasuk, right? The pasuk says, Amar Hashem me'atav et olam, forever, in every generation. But we learn from Rabbi Zer, we see from the Achronim that no, Rabbi Yirmiyah is qualifying that and saying it means that she always comes back home, but there could be a generation where it doesn't happen like that. Okay? I want to look at the Avat Eitan, and then, just in the interest of time, maybe we'll skip the Avat Eitan, and let's go now to the Gemara in Ketubot. Okay? All right. So we're going to do the Gemara Ketubot, then Tosfot, and then I want to develop a mahalach together. So the Gemara Ketubot tells us about this family, about whom specifically and uniquely we're told they were Chuta Mishulash. Okay? Rabbi Chama bar Bisa, Azil Yativ Trei Shnei Bevei Meidusha. So Rabbi Chama, remember, he was in the middle. Okay? So he went and he learned for 12 years in the Beit Midrash. Kiata Amar Loi Avid Keda Avid Ben Chachinai. It means, he says, I'm not going to do like what this other person did. This is the previous story told in that Gemara. It's not for now. Basically, that person just showed up at his home and it led to some tragedy. So he says, he said, first I'm going to send word to my wife that I'm coming back after 12 years because he hasn't seen her in so long. So he goes to, basically he's learning somewhere else. Then he comes to the Beit Midrash of his local town. He sends word to his wife and says, I'm coming home. And then he says he's going to go home. What happens? His son Rabbi Yoshai comes, Yativ Kamei, and sits with him in the Beit Midrash. So when Rabbi Yoshai they started talking. They're in the Beit Midrash. Let's learn. Rabbi Yoshai is asking Rabbi Chama some questions. Rabbi Chama sees that he's very sharp. He's very smart. His son.
Okay.
But he doesn't know that it's his son because he hasn't been home for 12 years. So what happens? Chalash da'ateh. He becomes weak. And Amar ihavi hacha havalizara kihai, which means if this guy can reach this level where he's so smart and so great, and he saw that he was younger than him, apparently. So could you imagine how great my son would have been if only what?
I've been home.
I'd have been home. Okay? Al bete, he goes to his house. Al brei, and this stranger accompanies him. Kam kameh. So Rabbi Chama, when he gets to the house, he sees the stranger, and he stands up before the stranger. Why? He thought this person, we were learning in the Beit Midrash, so now he came to my house because he wants to continue the discussion. So he stood up to honor him as a Torah scholar that he recognized was greater than him. Amra le debitu, what did his wife say to him? Mi ika abba dekai mikame bra. Who ever heard of a father who stands up in honor before his son? Okay? So Rabbi Chama realizes that this person was his son. And so here again we have this line of Rabbi Bar Chama applying to this family the Chut HaMishulash. Okay? So the story here is Rabbi Chama had left his house for so long, he didn't know who his son was, what he looked like. He comes back, his son is sharper than him. And we saw from Tosfot also, Tosfot says Rabbi Yoshai was the greatest of them, right? His son was sharper than him. He recognizes it. He regrets having left his house because, my son could become such a great Torah scholar if I had stayed home, only to realize that was his son all along. Okay? If we look just quickly at Tosfot here on this Gemara, it's a beautiful story. It gets teary-eyed. It's goosebumps, Tosfot here just says, similar to what he said earlier, so look what Tosfot does. He quotes the Gemara Bava Metzia about the pipe. So what's the connection? Because he's trying to understand why here it's a Chut HaMishulash. And this is what I said before by accident when I said I'll ask you a different question. Rabbi Bisa doesn't appear in this story at all, right? Whereas we have a story of Rabbi Chama, we have a story of Rabbi Yoshaya, and Rabbi Bisa isn't in this story. So now Rabbi Bar Chama is coming and saying, look at this Chut HaMishulash of 3 generations, but Rabbi Bisa doesn't make an appearance. So why are you saying Chut HaMishulash? So Tosfot comes and says, don't worry, because in Bava Metzia we have this argument where the 3 of them are arguing with the pipe with the neighbor's courtyard and this and that. And so there we see Chut HaMishulash, and Rabbi Bisa was really also part of the Chevra. And so that's why it's a Chut HaMishulash, and that it goes on for all generations. Kevan she'adam lomed, hu b'no ven b'no, מכאן ואילך Torah מחזרת אכסניא שלה, and the Torah always comes back to its lodgings, me'anizo birti v'chulei. Okay, so Tosfot inserts the limud from Bava Metzia to explain where the Chut HaMishulash is in the Gemara Ketuvot. Okay, so I want to suggest the following. Okay, you guys said earlier, why do we see Chut HaMishulash from the pipe if they're arguing with each other? And you said, no, it's machloka l'shem shamayim, it's a good thing, davar chiyuvi, that they're arguing. And it could be. And here we have Rabbi Bisa is missing from this story about Rabbi Chama and Rabbi Yoshaya, but still we apply Chut HaMishulash. So I want to suggest the following ma'alach, and I think it ties everything together very nicely. I want to suggest as follows. Let's go back and reread the Gemara in Bava Metzia very carefully, and I want to suggest, even though the Gemara in Bava Metzia, which is talking about the pipe and the water and the courtyard and the roof, and it's within the context of those types of discussions and those types of very technical halachic debates, that I want to suggest that really it's a metaphor and a mashal. And the mashal is as follows, right? We know in Mayim el Torah, Hoi kol tzamei l'chul hamayim. And water is compared to Torah. And in particular, the idea of why is Torah compared to water? Because it gives sustenance, it gives life, and it's something that you spread, and that it goes from high places to low places. And that Torah is compared to water in many places in Shas. And so I want us now to reread the Gemara of Batra with this in mind. Sinora mikaleach mayim lechatzer chavero. You have a pipe that brings water from the roof of one house into the courtyard of the next house. Okay. Uva bal hagag hamelamed is ben chaver. Good. Uva bal hagag lesotmo. And the person who has the pipe wants to block the water. Is the person who owns the courtyard allowed to prevent him from doing so? Okay. So I want to argue as follows. The house is a Baal Abayit, right? A Baal Abas. And the water is flowing from the roof of one house into the courtyard of the next house, which is an analogy for saying that a father who has Torah knowledge and is bigger, and he's in the previous generation, is supposed to flow, that is supposed to pass on that Masorah to his child and give water, and water the courtyard, which is lower down, of the son. And that's how things are supposed to work. And now, for whatever reason, the father wants to stop the flow of the water. He doesn't want to continue the water to flow into the courtyard. Is the son allowed to come and protest and say that I've benefited from this water? You can't change the status quo and suddenly stop giving me the water, because the water is sustenance for me. And now let's look at the machloket, okay? So what are the opinions? Rabbi Yoshaya Amar Me'akev. So Rabbi Yoshaya says the neighbor is allowed to say, you're not allowed to divert the flow of the water. You have to keep the water flowing into the courtyard. Rabbi Chama said, Eino Me'akev. Rabbi Chama said, no, I own the house, I own the water. You can't tell me what to do. I'm allowed to divert the water. And why am I diverting the water? I want it for myself.
I agree with the next one.
You agree with the second opinion? Yeah. And I would also tend to agree with the second opinion, except I want to say, what's the story in Ketubot? Rabbi Chama leaves his house to go learn Torah. He's stopping the flow. He's stopping the flow of his water. Instead of teaching his son, the water is supposed to flow from him to his son. It's the same thing. These are the same. He wants to keep the Torah for himself, and because he needs to learn. For 12 years, I need to learn Torah. So he says, you can't divert. I'm allowed to divert the water. Yeah, there's a price to pay. You've benefited from the water. Great, but now I need to gather the water for myself. I also have things I need to water. I need to do my own limud Torah. The Hoilo Kol Tzamei L'Chul Hamayim applies to me. I have the right, indeed the responsibility, to do that, to go learn in the Beit Midrash and to keep the water for myself. And then who argues with him and says Ma'akev? It's Rabbi Yoshaya. Who's Rabbi Yoshaya? His son. Because his son was the one who was neglected. His son was the one who didn't get to receive the water for all that time, because his father had went off and he had learned. His father had been sotem, the tzinor of water, of Torah knowledge from him to the son. So the son said, Ma'akev, the son has a right to protest and say, Abba, I need you to pass on the Masorah to me. You have a responsibility, v'shinantum levanecha. You have a mitzvah to pass on to your children. It's true, you also have to learn, but there needs to be an understanding that you can't do it at the expense of drying out the Torah of your child. And so that's why when Rabbi Yoshaya says, Me'akev, Rabbi Chama says, I know Me'akev, a father and son, are they arguing about a pipe into the neighbor's yard? Maybe. But they're really arguing about the Maaseh Shaya in their life of, was it right for Rabbi Chama to go off and learn for 12 years and then leave Rabbi Yoshaya out to dry? So how do we decide who was right? Right? How do we decide? So, Azal Shaile Rabbi Bisa. They go ask the grandfather, because why is the grandfather? Who is the grandfather? In other words, when Rabbi Chama comes back to the Beis Medrash and he meets this guy, he doesn't know who he is, and the guy is sharper than him and smarter than him, and he's answering all these questions, and he says, if only my son could know. But he wasn't around. So how does Rabbi Yoshaya know all the Torah that he does know, since Rabbi Chama wasn't there? The grandfather, Rabbi Bisa taught him. Of course his grandfather taught him, because the Abba went to go learn for 12 years. So they go ask Rabbi Bisa, what does Rabbi Bisa say? Ma'akev. The grandson's right. Right. He taught him, because the grandfather says, you have a responsibility to pass the water down to the next generations. And you went and learned for 12 years. You didn't see your wife, you didn't see your kids. So I'm going to teach you what the halacha is. The halacha is ma'akev. The halacha is that you can't do that when you have a son who needs to learn Torah. Because Torah, learned in a vacuum in the base medrash, fine, there's a time and a place, but not when you have a son that you need to water. You have a mitzvah of shinantam levanecha, and you have to take that responsibility seriously. That's why Rabbi Bisa, they go ask him, he says, Ma'akev, he agrees with the grandson and not with the son. Because the whole point is not just, I'm disagreeing with my son and my grandson, but it's about the family, the dynamics of the family. And that's why he says, Ma'akev, that the son has the right to protest.
See, adding also that maybe he could have been the biggest of the three, but he stayed back as the grandfather to teach, and because he had that responsibility. He could have been the greatest of the three generations, but this responsibility held him back.
Maybe. I hadn't thought of that, but you could infer that. Yeah, it could be.
That's also why with Rabbi Akiva, for example, he was allowed to go and he only had a daughter. He didn't have the same responsibility.
Right, he didn't have a son. Exactly. His wife, yeah. I think you're right. Right, because Rabbi Akiva also went and learned for 12 years, and then another 12 years.
But that was okay.
Yeah. Right. It's not that you're not allowed to go learn Torah. That's not the message here. The message is understanding the responsibility to your family and how to balance those. And so, in the end, the halacha follows who? Sorry?
How does it tie in with the Chut HaMishulash?
How does it tie in with the Chut HaMishulash? Good. How does it tie in with the Chut HaMishulash? Very good. So that's, I want to argue that these two stories are really interconnected. Indeed, they're the same. And that's why we have this weird argument between a son and a grandson and a grandfather, because this is all a mashal about the story that we saw in Ketubot, about their life and about the responsibility that they have. And in the end, the halacha follows the grandfather and the grandson, right? Amar v'yidam Shmuel, that Abba Chatzer Ma'akev alav, that he's allowed to protest. And that's the halacha. And how does it connect to a Chut HaMishulash? So when we said a Chut HaMishulash l'miran, Hashem promises me'ata ve'ad olam. So the Avat Eitan that we didn't learn says this is like a divine promise in the sense that if you have 3 generations who learn, that there's a siyata deshmaya that all the children will learn, right? It's this metaphysical promise. But I would argue that it's not a promise. It's a statement of fact that if you have generations of people, let me say one more thing, then I'll explain the answer. So how do we understand when Rabbi Chama comes back, he sees his son is sharper than him? After he thought, if I had stayed behind, I would have had a son who was even smarter than me. Then he realizes his son is smarter than him. And his son is smarter than him despite not having gone off to yeshiva for 12 years. Because his grandfather taught him, his son ended up learning more Torah from the grandfather than he was able to learn in 12 years in the Beit Midrash. So what does Rabbi Chama say? He says, Chalash date. He says, if only I'd had a son like that. Then he sees that his son is like that. So what does he realize? Rabbi Chama. He realizes, I would argue, that he was wrong. He realizes that when he went off and he learned, he came back and he saw his son knew more Torah than he had ever learned and was sharper than he ever was. He was chozer bo. And he, in the end, the halacha doesn't follow him. In the end, he's not correct. It's not me'enu makav, it's makav. And he realizes the lesson that his father, Rabbi Bisa, was teaching him about the importance of continuing Torah from generation to generation. And that's what it means, chalash date, and eventually that he sees, what father stands up in kavod in front of his son? A father who goes off and learns for 12 years and neglects his son has to stand up in honor of his son. That's his punishment, because he didn't take the responsibility that he had to water the neighbor's courtyard. So, why this family dafka? Why not every other? Why not Hillel? Why not Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yonanan? There's lots of families that have 3 generations of Torah scholars. This family specifically, because the Chut HaMishulash, why will generations have Torah? Only when there's generation after generation, a chazakah of parent and child relationships, where they realize the importance of watering the next generation. That it's a statement, it's not a divine promise, it's an outcome. That if you're a family that says ma'akev, and you water the neighbor's courtyard, you make sure to instill Torah in your child, and that's your whole philosophy in life, and you do it, and you teach your children it, you teach your grandchildren it. Ben Beno, Dalmid Chachamim, even if the son leaves and comes back, you still ensure that the grandson learns it. And you get to the point where your son realizes the error of his ways. That's a family of a Chut HaMishulash lo b'miran yatek. Because that will guarantee that family will realize and always know the importance of chinuch and shinantam ve'levanecha. You have to teach it at any cost and make sure that that's the most important thing that guides your family forward, is to teach Torah to the next generation. I want to have one final diuk. And this is already, you can not accept this diuk, but still recognize the pshat of everything I just said. When it says, Tzinor mekaleach ma'im lechatzer chavero, So what case is this talking about? Like the case that's presented, let's go back to like understanding this as a regular halachic debate, okay? So you have a guy who lives next to somebody else, and he has a pipe that's flowing water into the neighbor's house, and one day he just decides, I want to divert the water to myself. So is the neighbor allowed to protest, right? So that could happen. I mean, it could be that the owner of a home, for however long, has been giving water to the neighbor, and then he says, you know what, I want the water for myself. It could happen, but there's another reason why that event could occur, or why this shaila could come up. And it could be because there's a new Bala Bait. It could be that the pipe was there, like person A lived in this house, and he didn't care. He used to water the neighbor's yard. He didn't mind the water going to the neighbor's yard. And then there's a new renter, there's a new owner, whatever it is, and he wants to use the water. And he says, it's my right to use the water. So is he allowed to now change it, even though the neighbor in the courtyard is the same neighbor? So that's another way to understand this shaila. So if so, and then we interpret this whole thing as a mashal, so then I would say, if I read it that way, Rabbi Bisa was the original owner of the house, the grandfather, and he used to pipe water into the children, into the neighbor's courtyard. And then Rabbi Chama comes along and inherits the home, and he wants to change the status quo. He wants to divert the water for himself. But Rabbi Yoshai is the same Rabbi Yoshai. He's still the grandson. He still needs the water. So is he allowed to protest? Even though it's Havayaku melech chadash ha-Mitzrayim shel Yedat Yosef, right? Is it the same king or is it a different king? You can almost read this in the same way. Is it like, okay, there's the same owner who just wants the water now? Or is it, there's a new Baal Bayis? It's a bit more dachuk.
Rabbi Shea wouldn't be the shachin, he would be the third owner.
Right, it would have been Rabbi Chama, who was the neighbor, under Rabbi Bisa.
Yeah.
No, Seder. So that's a bit more. Yeah, you're being medayek in the deal. I said before I said this that you don't have to accept this last point, but the broader chidush of, and by the way, I tried to check. I couldn't find like a situation where Rabbi Chama and Rabbi Shai and Rabbi Bisa appear together in this way in any other place in Shas. It's just these examples, and so to tie them together, it's almost required, and it's clear if you interpret this halachic debate about a pipe within the lens of the life story of Rabbi Chama and Rabbi Yoshaya, that it sheds a whole other layer, and it explains why Rabbi Bar Chama suddenly randomly says, this family is a chuta mishulash. It's not that random, it's that they're the ones who fulfill this whole idea, and specifically because this whole debate about the tzinur is a mashal, that I see the water flowing into the neighbor is the fulfillment of the chuta mishulash. It's the outcome of chuta mishulash. That's why it makes sense Rabbi Bar Chama applies it in this scenario.
Shkoyach.
It's a good. It's a chiddush. It's a good chiddush. It's a good. Yeah. Shenizke to water our children's.
Amen. Amen.
Oh.